Thanks, Ellen. Hi, everybody. Thanks for being here. I'm Shannon Brady. I'm an associate professor of psychology here at Wake Forest. And officially, this panel is the intersection of social media, communication, and families. But looking across all of the sort of different topics, we really thought our distinctive piece was the family piece. And so I'm honored to have two co-speakers. I also brought my family right here in the front row for sort of show and tell with our focus on families. But first, I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Marina Kirschmar, who is a professor and associate dean here at Wake Forest. She's in communications. Marina, will you introduce yourself just really briefly and tell us like one fun fact about yourself and technology?
Sure. So my name is Byrum Welcome. I'm a professor here in the Department of Communication. I have studied children and media much longer than, let's just say this, my earliest studies were on this thing called television. And one fun fact about me and technology, I'm a mother of 4, and they would tell you that I'm not fun. So I guess my technology fact is I raised my older 2 without television or screens of any kind, which was really, really easy back then. And I have 2 younger children as well, and I can't say the same for them.
Great, and our other panelist is Mikey Jensen, who is an associate professor of psychology at UNCG, drove over today. Welcome, Mikey.
Thanks for having me. I'm Mikey Jensen. My research focuses on young people and their social relationships, and especially how those might play out online with parents and peers. I don't know if it's a fun fact, but so a lot of my research focuses on the content of young people's digital communications. So I have read personally probably 50,000 parent-child text messages over the course of my career. So I've got some interesting insights from those with consent.
Which she will share with us as we go along. And I guess my fun fact is that I was in college in 2004, so I was one of the earliest adopters of Facebook. When it was like the 3rd time that it rolled out to a new batch of colleges was my college. So we wanted to start by sort of thinking about the basics. So what do we actually know about technology and screen time and families, and especially like how that might differ across different kinds of families?
Yeah, sure. So we've actually got some really neat insights already today, so I'm really grateful to be a part of this cool cast of characters talking about different aspects of technology. But we actually know a decent amount now about the ways that young people and families engage with technology. So it's ever present in daily life. Young people are very online. By the age of 10, almost half of young people have their own smartphone. By the time they're 14, it's like 90%. So kids are online, and they often have smartphones that it is available to them at any moment, and this comes up within the family. So families use screens in a variety of ways. In my lab, we talk about kind of technology as a tool in parenting. So maybe you're texting your kid to remind them to turn in their homework, or that you're going to pick them up after this event at a certain time, or to remind them of some standard for behavior or a rule. So it can be a tool. It can also be a trap. So parents and kids fight plenty about technology and screen time, but not any more than they fight about anything else that's a matter of personal jurisdiction, like bedtime or peers or dates. And then it can also be something that's a target of the parent-child relationship. So how are parents setting limits? How are they kind of talking about the content of online communications? So they engage around technology in a lot of different ways. Some of these ways are developmentally focused, which I think we're going to talk about a little. They engage differently when the kids are little than when they're older. And some of it is driven by other external factors. So we had some people who were talking about kind of the other systems within which families are embedded. So we know that lower SES and families of color tend to spend more time on screens than their white SES or white or higher SES counterparts. And we also know that parents set different types of limits and engage. So we know that like families of color and lower SES families are actually more likely to engage in discursive mediation. So talking about the content of what's happening online, co-use, things like that. And that some families just have different concerns, like worries about the types of content. So there's actually a lot of nuance there.
Great, Marina, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to be talking about some of this as well, but one of the things that you said that I really want to point to is this idea that talking about media with your kids is so important. And as you mentioned, so much of what we know says that it is not merely what they consume, although content is incredibly important. It's how families are incorporating it into their lives, and that some co-use can actually be helpful. So we know that generally speaking, a lot of parents have problems with their kids playing just too many video games. But we know that when parents and children play video games together, that can actually be very beneficial to the parent-child relationship, and they report higher levels of parent-child satisfaction. That effect can go either direction, of course, and that they become more open with each other about other things as well. So there's not sort of a one-size-fits-all model, as you were talking about.
So that's a perfect lead into the next question, which a few speakers have already said, not all sort of screen time is equal. But if a parent asks the question, like, how much screen time is too much, like, is that even the right question? And what should we be asking? And if not, what should we be asking instead?
Yeah, so I should start out by saying that a lot of my research is with very young children. So a lot of my experiments and studies look at children ages maybe 2 to 6, 2 to 7. And for that age group, well, for all age groups, I would say content matters more than the amount of time that they're spending on screens, but that doesn't mean that, any amount is fine. For very young children, starting them out with screens at, say, 2 years old, what we do know from the research is that they're not learning anything from screens at that age. It's just sort of the change, the lights, the colors that keep them looking like they're very engaged, and they will watch it, but they're not really learning very much from, if anything, at that point. So you will all remember things like Baby Einstein. They're not getting anything out of that. They're simply not learning because they don't have the ability to transfer the two-dimensional space to three-dimensional space. So in some of our research where we were trying to teach preschoolers how to engage different kinds of children in their playgroups, in one of the studies we used animated dogs, and the primary lesson that they learned was be nice to dogs in wheelchairs, which obviously is not what we want them to get. So we have to be careful with the content that they are consuming. So I would say at the very earliest ages, they really shouldn't be using screens much at all. Maybe to FaceTime a relative far away, and that can actually be useful because it helps them start to make that connection between two-dimensional and three-dimensional space. Like, how do we apply what we see on screens to this thing that we call life that they're still trying to learn what it is themselves when they're that age. In addition, content matters a lot, so we need to know what our children are consuming on screens and what our goals are for them. So some of the media that they're consuming is educational, and that can be very beneficial. But when I talk about educational media to parents, what I will say is that all media are educational. It's just a matter of what we want them to learn. So just because you have switched from a Sesame Street or Nickelodeon educational video to something that is just to help them relax or chill out for a while, they're learning from both of those. They're just learning different kinds of content. And so amount of time matters, content matters, mediation, how you talk about this stuff with your kid matters. So I wish there was some simple answer, but as we will find out, there's just not.
Great, so let's kind of stay with little kids a little bit more, so we'll stay with you, Marina. Like, when parents are thinking about first introducing screens, so we say 2, no screens, really, but at some point in time, between like that one and that one, we probably are going to end up with some level of screens, right? Like Hannah's in kindergarten, she's required to use screens at school. So as parents think about that sort of first introduction, to the extent that we get to be intentional about it, because some things happen just because they happen, but what should parents be thinking about? Like, what are the sort of benefits and the risks, and what should parents really put their attention to as they're thinking about the earliest ages in introducing screens?
So, ideally, I say this as someone who has 4 children myself, all of whom are much older than this age group now. But we want them ideally to be engaging in the 3D world, right? And so we want them to be, playing with the Tupperware in the cabinet rather than sitting in front of a screen. That said, we all know what it's like to be sitting there with a toddler who is fussy and there just doesn't seem to be anything else. Maybe you're in an environment with no other option. I would say in those cases, try to keep it to a minimum and know what they're doing, not use it as the default. And then as children age, whenever possible, spending some time talking to them about what it is that they're watching. So these are all sort of ideal situations, recognizing that, family life can be chaotic and we do what we can to get through it some days. But so talking to them about things, mediating things for them, explaining things for them, especially in those early stages when you're just introducing screens. And then balancing a lot of screen time with non-screen time so that they can learn the other kinds of skills that we want them to learn by interacting with the real life world.
Great. So then, Mikey, but kids don't stay little. They get big, as someone heard. So what works for a 6-year-old is not going to work for a 14-year-old or a 17-year-old. What should parents be thinking as kids get older? What are the benefits? What are the risks? Where's the parents' role as we move from the littlest kids to sort of, tweens and teenagers?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think it gets more complicated as they age. So we have pretty solid evidence about the nature of the risks, especially of displacing time in early childhood. By the time kids become teenagers, they're engaging on screens for a lot of different reasons. And the ways that they engage on those screens, some of it is really awesome and enriching, right? So some of it is connecting with a pen pal friend that they knew when they were little and they had this really strong sense of social connection. Some of it is for marginalized youth finding a community that they cannot find in their offline lives. Maybe it's learning a new skill or demonstrating mastery of something, 3D design or whatever. So there's a lot of really cool, flourishing, enriching ways that they engage online. There's plenty of just neutral, neither good nor bad ways that young people engage online. And then there's some risky things that young people are doing online. So we have pretty solid evidence around certain types of risk, like cyber victimization is not good for kids. So getting bullied or mistreated in online or offline spaces is bad for mental health. We have pretty decent evidence that engaging with content that is not developmentally appropriate, so say violent content, especially for younger tweens or so, pornography, right? Especially if you didn't seek it out. So if you're younger, so that's inadvertently presented to you. So there's plenty of risks. And then there's all these other nuanced ways that young people engage in between. So it's really hard, I think, for families to know. It's not just, hey, no screens. It seems like a simple fix to say no screens till you're 16. I don't think that that's probably the fix. There's some really lovely things that young people do online. And families, I think, are actually, teens and families are pretty skilled actors in navigating this. Young people do a lot of curating of their social media feeds to try and weed out the bad stuff that they don't want to see, people who treat them inappropriately, people who are sharing things that they think are ugly or hateful, and trying to make those enriching spaces. And then their parents, I think, are on this journey with them. We are sometimes less skilled, but are capable of getting there with some, education.
What helps us upskill faster? Because I think I have about 4 years.
The message I always tell parents is that the skills you already have can be grown, right? So, and often kind of analog skills are the ones that will suit you best. So talk to your kid about what they're doing online. I think parents sometimes have this idea that they have to use technological tools to solve their concerns around their kids' tech use. And that can be really prohibitive. It can feel like I don't understand how to use the new app or 360 or whatever, and the new screen time thing, and I got an OS update on my phone and now it doesn't work the way it used to work. I often tell parents that sometimes a low tech fix is the best one. Talking to your kid about what they're doing online, how does it make them feel? What are you doing on there that makes you feel awesome? Tell me about that. Who are you talking to? What's it like? Do you have any experiences that are making you feel uncomfortable? And so I think that often can be the sweet spot.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Becky. So we're not done yet, but if you could send every person, every family here home with sort of one concrete evidence-based takeaway, what would it be, Marina?
I would say that there are so many individual difference variables that what you should think about is, who is my kid? I mean, you know your kid and you know your family better than anyone else around, better than any of the experts, any of the people who research this stuff. So knowing what works for your child, maybe your child is really into robotics, and the only way that they can learn about it in that particular environment is watching a lot of stuff online. Well, that's an ideal way for your child to engage with media. For some kids, not that I'm recommending violent media, but if they watched it, they would be more, they would find it distasteful and not imitate it. So just knowing what is good for our kids, what's not good for our kids, and as Mike was saying, being able to talk to them about it, because they will come to you and ask questions if you keep that, as we all know as parents, keep those lines of communication open, and those analog skills are really going to be the ones that are most useful. So really just knowing your family and knowing your child and setting up the home environment, the rules, the boundaries in ways that work for your individual family.
Yeah, so I'm a researcher and a professor, but one of my other roles is I'm a clinical psychologist and a family therapist by training, and so I get to supervise our lovely clinical psychologists in training at UNCG. And it's one of the funnest parts of that job is that families have a lot of questions around how to navigate tech-related stuff, like how do I set my kid up for success in a digital age? And so we sometimes talk about it as scaffolding those early experiences to be ones where they're learning. And when I say early, I don't mean early like your kids or my actual child who's 3. I guess I mean more like 9, 10, 11, 12, when they're starting to more independently navigate digital spaces in a way that is where they could be maybe learning some bad habits, or could be really setting themselves up for success. So I encourage parents to not just throw their kid into the wilds of the internet unaccompanied, but to have some early experiences. So like say they get their first tablet that they can I guess my kid has a tablet, but she doesn't use it independently, other than in the car or plane.
The first time that they have the password.
Yeah, and they know how to find things.
Right.
So set them up in a way that has some guardrails set up. So do it proactively, have conversations with your kid about what this is gonna look like. Somebody earlier made a driver's ed analogy. How can we set them up with the skills to enter into this new competency domain in a way that is helping them navigate it successfully, building self-regulatory capacities, knowing how to avert kind of risky situations. And the best way to do this is by talking to your kid. There are some tools out there though. So the AAP, the American Academy of Pediatrics, actually has this family media use plan, which is lovely in the sense that it's really long. If you do the whole thing, it'll take you forever. It's available in English and Spanish, but it's meant to be kind of a values-based tool. So you can pick the things that are important to your family. So earlier, one of our speakers was very importantly talking about family mealtime. You can click that and have that be one of the things that you establish some family policies around. Do we have screens at mealtime? Maybe not. Great, we can figure out that. What are some other things? What about content? And I think sometimes that can be helpful to families to navigate these waters if they are not sure which topics they need to be thinking about.
Yeah, it's interesting thinking about how you might intersect that with AI, right? So this plan is really hugely long, right? But you can think about okay, off the top of my head, here are the 6 things that I think that I care about. Help me find those parts of this really long tool.
It does let you select.
Sure. But then it help me interrogate what else you think a person like me, based on what you know from me from my search history, right? What else might I do? And you might think about ways in which some of the tools that we have would actually make a long tool like that somewhat more manageable right away.
I would also add to that we're all sitting here talking about teenagers and children as if we don't use technology incorrectly ourselves a lot. Because it's so, it's designed to be addictive. If it weren't addictive, there wouldn't be billions of dollars being made off of these computers that we keep in our pockets. And so really thinking about how we're using it as well, because we know that the way kids learn is one of the ways they learn is by watching us. So if I want my kids to look me in the eye when I am talking to them, instead of having a phone in their hands, well then I better be sure that I'm not doing that when I talk to them as well. Even if it's just a work email.
Right. Well, so I want to end on a point that another panel, the one with Dr. Armstrong and Dr. Miller-Fitzwater, they touched on this idea that like, we've been talking about families, but should this really be all on parents, right? We're asking parents to do so much with regards to sort of learning about all of these tools, helping scaffold these tools for their kids, then keep them safe as they use these tools. It seems like policy could be a thing that could help us here. So, based on your understanding of this problem, like where do you see sort of policies that could help families better reap the benefits of social media, screen time, technology, and protect against the harms? And how do we sort of efficiently, when we've got so many other things for our day jobs and our home lives, like agitate for those policies?
So I'll start off just by mentioning a lawsuit that I'm very excited about. Many of you,
which is not as simple as you hear all over again, but tell us more.
Many of you have probably read that there is a lawsuit in California against Meta that is being put together by parents and educators, claiming that social media use is addictive for teenagers and harmful to their mental and emotional well-being. And there are so many documented cases, both anecdotally, tragically, but also just the research, the consistent finding about the negative impact of certain kinds of social media use on adolescents. And the way that lawsuit was modeled was using the same strategies that were used against big tobacco companies to demonstrate the addictive quality of their products and that they knew about it in advance. And it looks like Meta is going to be held responsible, and I'm hoping that has a trickle down. Hasn't wound its way all the way through the court systems yet, but I am hopeful that results in some trickle down effects of both greater self-censorship by companies and also the need for greater policy.
Yeah, so I'm pro-regulation. So a lot of my research tends to suggest that like one of the things about screen time is okay for teens, and people maybe sometimes assume that I would not think that we should regulate platforms. I definitely think we should. So I agree that holding companies to account when harms are done is important. Someone earlier already stole my Section 230 talking point. But the thing I often say is that so much of what we do in America is reactive, right? So we sue companies after harms have already happened. Doesn't have to be that way. So some nations regulate technology companies proactively, and they think about how they could restrict the design of social media to do no harm or even try to help. And so I do think this is a thing that we could think about is how could we maybe take a more design-focused approach to regulation and be encouraging companies or making them design platforms that aren't harming young people or older people, because usually no harms are not unique. It does not stop harming when you turn 18. But how can those design features, especially in this age where we can know a lot more about the features and affordances of different platforms that may be working or not working, screen time is like too broad, right? So it's what specific ways could they build these platforms to be better for kids? And there are some small attempts to be done at this. The Kids Online Safety Act is currently kind of winding its way through Congress. But they're slow, as legislation often is. And then I guess the other thing would be to stop undermining the protections we do have. So content moderation, for instance, is one thing that can help protect kids from things like cyber victimization. And we have really cut off the legs of content moderation of late.
Well, on that happy note, we're finished. Thank you so much, Megan.